I hope you've been enjoying this series, and today as we wrap up, we've been talking about games we play, and while those games like that are fun and interesting and competitive and things like that, when it comes to relationships, we've said throughout the series that it's not good to play games with our relationships, because when there's a winner and a loser, well, that's not good for the relationship, because in a relationship, the win is actually the relationship. And so anytime there's a winner and a loser, it's not good for the relationship. And so we've been talking about different games that we play, and today we're going to talk about another one that I think most of us, if not all of us, have played from time to time throughout our lives. And that is the comparison game. And this comparison game, it actually starts when we're very, very young. You know, when you're young and you've got a friend and you go to their house, and you go over to their house and you start playing with all of their toys, one of two things happen. Either you have an amazing time and you can't wait to go back because their toys are so much better than yours, or you can't wait to get back home and you never want to go there again because your toys are so much better than theirs. And so this comparison game, you compare your toys to your friends' toys, and it's kind of goes on from there. And when you get to school, you know, you get to school and you're looking at your lunch, and you're looking at your friend's lunch, and you're back and forth, and you realize that you have an apple, a banana, and an orange, and your friend has a pack of chips and a Kit Kat. And you're like, I kind of want their lunch instead of mine. And so this just continues throughout life, on and on and on. When you get to a teenager, you know, you get your first car, and it's a hand-me-down, but you're grateful for your car until your friend gets a car, and they don't get a hand-me-down, they get a brand new one. And so now, suddenly, your hand-me-down car is not looking so good, and you compare your car to your friend's car. But it doesn't just stop with kids and teenagers. It kind of just carries on throughout life. I mean, you're at that party, and this guy, he starts talking about his career and his investments and his portfolios and all of these things, and then you start comparing your career and investments, or lack of thereof, to his. Or ladies, you're at this place and this lady walks in and she's dressed a certain way, and then you start comparing your wardrobe and the way you dress to her. Or you're driving down 168 and you're fine, and you're driving down 168, and then here comes this guy right past you and he's pulling a boat, and you're reminded that you don't have a boat. Or you do have a boat, and last week, your boat was completely fine, and you were grateful for your boat, but now you've seen his. And now that you've seen his, you're not so good with your boat, and now you want his boat. You see, this just kind of goes on and on and on. And then we get on social media, and this makes things worse, because you start looking at things and people that you don't even know, and you start looking at their highlight reels and the things that they got going on in their life, and you pick out that thing, and suddenly you start comparing your life, and then suddenly things just aren't going so well. And the idea is that this comparison game is basically this. It's sizing up your life based on what you see in another. Well, we look at our lives and we size up our life based on what we see in another, and it usually goes one of two ways. Either our life is not going very good, and we look at other people and their life is so much better, and ours is just not very good. Or our life is going pretty good, and we're looking at their lives, and we're comparing ourselves to people who don't have as much as we do, and who aren't as good as us, and you know, we're bigger and better and faster and newer and shinier. And so we have one of two ways that we go about this idea of comparing. We're either down in the dumps and we're terrible and everybody else is so amazing in their life, or we're so much better than everybody else and we kind of puff out our chest. And the reality is that neither one of those things is good. Neither one of those things, in terms of doing a comparison with other people, is a good thing. In fact, Andy Stanley says this. He says, there is no win in comparison. There's no win in comparison. Anytime you're comparing your life to somebody else, it's just not good for the relationship. And so here we are thinking, well, what's the big deal? I mean, what's the big deal that we compare? I mean, it's just, we do it as children. It's not that big a deal. I mean, most of the time I keep these comparison thoughts. Most of the time I keep them in my own head. Like very rarely do they, seep out or whatever. I mean, sometimes, but, we're not going to talk about that part. But most of the time, these things just stay in my head. So what's the big deal? What's the big deal with comparing? Well, the idea is that out of comparison, when we compare, out of that comes pride and envy, jealousy, and idolatry. And I think all of us would agree that those things are not healthy. Those things are not good for relationships. So if we can agree that those things are not good for relationships, well, what's the root cause of some of that? Well, that goes back to then our comparing to one another. And so I think it's this idea of comparing. It actually is a big deal. I think it's bigger than we realize. In fact, I think it takes our eyes off of what God is doing in our life. I think that's the bigger issue, the bigger thing, is that anytime we're comparing things, we're comparing our lives to other people, it takes our eyes off of what God is doing in us. And that's going to come out in the story we're going to look at today. We're going to look at something Jesus said, because Jesus teaches on this idea. And he actually thinks that when we compare, he actually thinks it is a big deal. And so he doesn't use the word comparison trap or comparison game or anything like that. But I think that's what he's getting at. And so he's having a conversation with some guys, and so with Peter, but we're going to back up to give you some context. And so as we back up, we find Jesus. He's about to be crucified, and we find Jesus having a conversation with his closest followers. He says, hey guys, listen up. Tonight, all of you are going to stop following me. Imagine that. You've been with this guy for 3 years, and tonight he says, hey, tonight all of you guys are going to stop following me. Well, Peter says this. Peter says, even if all fall away on account of you, I never will. Jesus, even if all those other guys do, not me. And Peter starts comparing himself to the other guys, to Matthew and John and Andrew and those guys. He starts comparing himself, and he says, even if all of those do, I won't. He says, I'm not like them. I'm Peter. I'm better than them. And Jesus looks at Peter and says, even you. In fact, Peter, tonight you're going to deny me 3 times. And so right after that, Jesus is arrested. He's hung on a cross and crucified. And that very night, Peter denied Jesus 3 times. Not only is Jesus hung on the cross, he rises from the dead. We're going to talk more about that at Easter, so just in case you were wondering what we're going to talk about at Easter. So Jesus rises from the dead, and over the next several days, Jesus spends some different times with his guys, and one of those times, he's having breakfast with these guys on the beach, and he has this conversation with Peter, and who he calls Simon. Simon was his other name. Jesus says, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? He gets Peter's attention. He says, all right, Peter, well, we got some work to do here, because remember, a couple days ago, you denied that you even knew me. You denied me 3 times. And so we got some work to do. And so Jesus basically asks him the same question 3 times to remind Peter of what happened. And we can dive more deeper into what this meant and all that, but we don't have time for that today. But he asked basically Peter the same question 3 times. And Peter says this. He says, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my lambs. And this is Jesus' way of saying, hey, Peter, are you with me now? Are you back in? Are we going to do this thing together? And so Jesus is just getting Peter to understand what's going on. And Peter's like, yeah, I love you. Yeah, I'm with you. He's all in. Well, then Jesus says this. He says, very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. He continues. He says, but when you're old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. He looks at Peter and he says, hey, Peter, I just want you to know that if you decide to be in with me, if you decide to do what I'm calling you to do and asking you to do, it's going to cost you your life. I just want you to know that up front. And then Jesus says to Peter, he says, follow me. Peter, I want you to know what's coming. Now you need to follow me. And just think about the moment. Think about the emotion of the moment. Peter has denied Jesus 3 times, and now Jesus is forgiving him and reinstating him to be part of the group. Such emotion, such a pivotal moment. And Peter says this, Lord, what about him? He's talking about John. God, Jesus, if following you and doing what you want me to do, if that's going to cost me my life, well, what about John? Is it going to cost him his life too? Jesus answered him. He said, if I want him to remain alive until I return, I'm not saying I do, but just if. And then Jesus says this. He asks Peter this. He says, what is that to you? Peter, I'm calling you to something. I'm asking you to do something. And Peter, yeah, it's going to cost you your life. But Peter, I'm asking you to follow me. John, well, what is that to you? What does it matter if it's going to cost him his life? What does it matter what I'm calling him to do? What does it matter what I'm asking him to do? What does it matter with John? What does that have anything to do with you, Peter? Peter, you must follow me. So what are you going to do, Peter? What are you going to do? And I think Jesus is trying to get Peter to understand something here. To understand that you can't compare yourself to John. You can't compare your life to John. You can't compare what I'm calling you to do with what I'm calling John to do. Peter, you must focus on following me. And that's the remedy for the comparison trap. That's the remedy for playing the comparison game. Instead of looking out to John, instead of looking out to other people, instead of looking out to whatever is going on in their life, Jesus says, hey, you, focus on me. I'm asking you to follow me. Peter, are you in? Are you with me? Do you get it? Do you understand? We're not comparing to everyone else. And basically, Jesus is saying this: you can't follow if you're overly concerned about what's going on in someone else's world. If you're so concerned about what's going on in somebody else's world that it takes your eyes off of Jesus, takes your eyes off of what's going on in your life and what God is doing in your life, if you're so overly concerned about that, you're never going to be able to follow Jesus. So Jesus says, let's put that aside. What is that to you? And you, Peter, follow me. And I think he's saying the same thing to you and to me. As we go throughout our lives, we'll have this tendency to compare. It starts in childhood and it just continues. And that's not necessarily a good thing. And so what do we do when we're tempted? What do we do when we find ourselves comparing ourselves to one another? What do we do when we find ourselves comparing ourselves to our colleagues at work and our neighbors and our friends and our coworkers and just all of these people? What do we do? Well, I think we ask these questions. I think we need to ask ourselves, what is that to me? My friend is doing this. Well, what is that to me? This is happening with my neighbors. Well, what is that to me? And stop. If we do that, that will help us stop the comparing. And then we need to ask ourselves this question: am I currently following through with what God has asked me to do? Am I currently following through with what God has asked me to do? Because he's asked all of us. He's not asking us the same thing he asked Peter, but he is asking us to follow. And it'll look different than Peter's. It may not cost you your life. But what is God asking you to do? And if you will focus on that instead of what's going on in other people's lives, if you'll focus on what God is asking you to do, to follow, that's the remedy for the comparison trap. So what is it that God is asking you to do? I think no matter where you are on the spiritual continuum of following Jesus, all of us can take a next step. Whether you've not started to follow Jesus yet, you can try this if you like. Whether you've been in church your whole life and you've been following Jesus for a long time, whether you're somewhere in the middle, all of us have a step to take in terms of following Jesus. And so Jesus is looking at you and looking at me and says, hey, don't worry about them. Don't worry about the boat. Don't worry about anything else. Are you with me? Are you following me? And this is the remedy for the comparison game, but this is also the remedy for all the other games. As we seek to have better relationships with other people, as we seek to have better relationships at home and better relationships at work and better relationships just across the board, as we seek to do all of that, we'll stop playing those games and be able to put those games down if we can get hyper-focused on Jesus. As he says, come, follow me. Let's pray. Father, we thank you so much that you call each and every one of us to come and follow. And I pray, God, that you would help us to recognize when we're playing this comparison game and other games with our relationships. God, help us to recognize these things. And then, God, just help us to narrow things down and focus in on what you're calling us to do. God, help us to know what these next steps are. God, and then give us the courage to take them. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.